Today, in this October autumn season in France, I wanted to start with one of the most basic recipes using one of the most beautiful and basic of all the fall fruits and vegetables, which are pumpkins and squashes. And today, what I have are two different varieties, butternut squash, which you're mostly familiar with, and in French it's called le butternut, and also a curry rouge, or in French we call it potimarron. Like potiron is pumpkin or squash, and marron means chestnut. So it does indeed have a bit of a chestnut texture and flavor. And so since what I'm trying to do on all of these videos is scale down to sort of a smaller proportion that we can make for just ourselves, our family, our friends, and not for a huge gang at this time, I'm going to use just this lovely little potimarron and do the entire soup with this. So this is a soup potimarron au Chataigne, because I'm going to use that chestnut flavor profile and build it a little bit more with some already cooked chestnuts. I'll talk more about those in a minute. So there's very little prep to do in this case with this recipe. All you need to do is to prepare the squash or potimarron, no matter which one you're using, and the onions. Now, two things, because there's just two basic ingredients in this, is you want to make sure that you really have the best, a very ripe squash, not one that's been picked too early. One way you can tell is you can look at this stem and see that the stem is quite dried, so that this was picked after it had started to dry, to fall off, because that's how we know things are ripe, is when a fruit or vegetable falls off of the vine or the tree that's growing on. It means it's ready to plant its seeds for the next season, and then we know something is really truly ripe. And we tend to think of ripe as flavor, but there's also a lot of other things going on, like nutrients and all kinds of molecular activity that we don't even think about when we're thinking about making a soup. But choose and make sure that your squash really is ripe, and that means it's going to be sweeter and have more depth of flavor. The other thing is the onion. Now I'm using it looks like it's a little flat onion, and that's because this is a sweet onion, more like a sweet onion you might get from Texas or Washington. They're sold as that. And I wanted to keep that milder onion flavor, so think about that. You could also use shallots, leeks. You could go in that direction. Today we're going to keep this very, very simple. I want this to be one of your basic recipes you're going to build on. So let's prep the two vegetables. You might as well get the onion out of the way because it makes me cry always. And in this case, I'm just going to rough chop these. So I'm cutting the bottom root end off and the top stem off, and pull those off and over, and then just take the outside peel off as well. Sometimes you have a little bit of mold or mildew in there if it's gotten wet or it's been stored in some way where it's damp, and you can just peel that off, and then I'll wash off that little bit there. So these can just cut a little outside skin there still. So these, because I'm going to use the immersion blender to puree this soup, they're going to get all broken up when they're completely cooked. So I only need to do some larger chops, not too finely diced. They'll cook about the same time that the actual squash will cook as well. That's all set to go there. And with the squash, it helps to have a flat base to work on. Now this is one reason why some people don't like squash to cut up, because it's very difficult or it's hard. What you can do is buy them already cut up. It's sort of a luxury. I'm going to go ahead and cut this little bit of this sort of scar from where it grew, probably onto the vine or rock. A little bit off of there. And then because this is a potimarron, this is a type of squash that the skin is very thin and edible, so I'm not going to have to peel it, which is one of the nice things. I am going to cut it down the middle, just carefully, and I'm using a pretty big knife, so I have some leverage. And you can hear it cracking open. And then we can see here all the seeds, and these are wonderful seeds for toasting as well, so I'll do that afterwards when we're done. And then we're just going to scoop out the center. And just get as much of the stringy, fibrous insides out as possible with those seeds. There's a lot of seeds in here, which is great. Pumpkin seeds are one of those things that very rich in nutrients and flavor as well, so we'll use them in something else. You can always use pumpkin seeds to garnish the soup as well, but we will see what we're going to do today. So just take off all of that. And this side as well. So let's just put these out of the way in a little bowl and we'll be ready to go. Now I'm just going to chunk up this squash, and I want to cut them small enough pieces that they'll cook rather quickly, because this is one of the beauties of this soup is it doesn't take very long from start to finish, maybe 30 minutes. Got a few more seeds there. When I'm cooking for people, I used to call this kitchen the garden because people would come and go and come and go, and I always had something on to cook. These days, as we know, many things have changed, and I find that I cook more for myself and with the occasional big hurrah, like inviting 35 people for lunch or dinner. But I'm not cooking on the regular basis like I was used to. And so I try to do things that are smaller quantities so I don't end up with vats of soup, and my freezer is already full of things I'll never finish unless I have a lot of friends come. And then of course everybody wants you to cook from scratch, so you want to just take something out of the freezer for your friends. So I find that what I'll do is I'll cook just enough for myself, and maybe 4 servings. So maybe 2 servings I'll have, you know, for lunch and supper, and then another day I'll have another serving or 2. If a friend shows up for lunch, perfectly acceptable to pull out some soup that's already made and heat it up. So if by now you're saying, oh my God, I would never go through that much work to cut up. But look how much from that one very small potimarron, how much flesh that we got with the seeds off to one side. The skin's still on here, And all I'm going to do now is find a bowl that's, a saucepan that's big enough to put this in, and or as big as I want to make my soup in. If I have too much, I may end up tossing some of it into the oven just to roast. Is another thing you can do. You can also roast all this first and then make your soup. But let's start with find the saucepan next. So I wanted to make this where you could really see what was happening inside the pot, and to use a smaller amount instead of making one of my big pots, marmites full of soup that'll feed 10 or 12 people. Remember, I just wanted to make about 4 generous servings here. So I'm going to start with this saucepan, which is, I'm going to measure it right now, so I'm going to know exactly how big it is. Okay, so I just measured this out, and this pot comfortably holds 2 full liters. It holds more than that to the top, but of course you would never measure something to the very top. You want about an inch and a half, or 2 inches even below what you're making, so it doesn't fall over. So I'm going to make about a liter and a half or a quart and a half of soup. That'll be plenty for me. That's, I figure, anywhere between a quarter of a liter and a half a liter as a serving, depending if you're having it with something or just by itself. So the first thing I want to do is put a little butter or oil in the bottom of this pan. And because I'm making this soup as a kind of a main course, I want it to have a really richness and thickness that is going to be beautiful with the squash and the chestnuts and the onion. So I'm going to use butter. You could use oil, of course, and you want to be careful of when you're choosing your oil, what kind of flavor you're looking for. I like a neutral oil, unless I'm looking for something that I'm going to add in, like olive oil, obviously, or a nut oil, which I may not want to heat. So as that's just starting to cook, let's go ahead and put the onions in. They'll melt with that. And the reason I like to do this first is just to get started. And to smell that wonderful onion, starting to smell that onion as it comes off. Have a little water so it's steaming off of my induction burner. It's one of the nice things about the induction is that you don't have to risk anything catching on fire as you get started. So this just breaks up the onion pieces, coats them all, and lets them get started. I have this on medium heat. It's a number 5 between 0 and 10. One of the things with induction burners, I don't have a full setup here because my little old 18th century kitchen only has 1 circuit for the entire kitchen, and it's enough for the lights and the chargers, and believe me, if I plugged in a big induction setup, I would blow out the entire house. So just as that's starting to heat up and these are beginning to soften, we don't want to cook them too much, and we certainly don't want to brown them. I'm going to add in the squash. I'm just going to put it on top, and I'm going to come up just about halfway. Okay, one more, see. Which means I'm not really using the entire squash. And that gives me a little bit left over. Oh, it's like so annoying when you don't have a whole much, but if I had to add more of this, it's going to be too much and overflow the pot. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to set this in a little pan. I'll stick it in the oven with some other vegetables later, and I have a roasted vegetable to go along for my dinner. Once you start hearing the noise and it's simmering or really sizzling, you're going to be careful you don't want to brown anything. I am going to just sort of stir the cubes of squash or pumpkin so that I get a little coating. And then you might as well, this is a good time. Sometimes it's easier to salt the solids instead of the soup. So think about that in this way. I'm going to salt this by as much as I would if I was going to serve that as a vegetable. If by adding the water it's not salty enough, I can add a little bit more at the end. And then just to add in the water, I'm going to have just enough to cover. Let's see if I'm not blocking myself here. Just to cover the squash. So the reason I add just this much water is that I don't want this to be too thin. Then I'd have to thicken it with something. Oftentimes soups like this, veloutés and other pureed soups, you start with potato and they can be a little starchy. It's nice to have a nice hearty potato and leek soup, but with this, the squash is hearty enough. It has enough starches to it, and we're going to use some of that chestnuts as well. So just enough water to cover, barely cover over. You're not boiling this in gallons of water. So that's how you make a really nice textured soup. Just cover your, whether this would be broccoli or zucchini or any other vegetable you might make a vegetable soup, just barely cover the water over. You can always add a little extra water at the end if you want to thin it down or cream or whatever. So we're going to let this cook. I'm leaving it on 5. I want it to start to boil. Maybe it'll come up. That'll get it a little jump started. And let's get the other seasonings that are going to go in with this now as well. So I just started harvesting some of the bay leaf as I have to trim back my bay bush so much. And because it's fresh and very strong scented, I don't want to put too much into this. I'm going to add just sort of like 1-2 leaves. This one's a little smaller, crinkled up leaf. And I'm going to add a little bit of ground pepper while it cooks, but we'll add some more at the end. This will sort of enrich this a little bit. And then one of the things that I didn't add yet, and I forgot to tell you about, was the piment d'Espelette. So let me get my piment and I'll show you how we're going to treat it. These came out of my garden yesterday and they really are beautiful. They're really easy to grow, and since they grow in the Basque Country in a very mild climate, not far from the ocean, not up in the mountains, I would think that they would grow pretty well almost anywhere. Now here, when you buy them, usually they're dried and they're strung up like you see the ristos in New Mexico. But what I'm going to do is use fresh because I have it already. And I'm just going to take a piece of one of these because they're not so hot, they're a little smoky, but they have enough flavor to really, I want it to infuse into the broth as the soup is cooking. So I'm just going to put 2 slices, and then I can heat this up a little bit more. Well, with some fresh, we'll use that as a garnish as well. I like hot things, I like spicy things, but I think you have to be very careful. It depends who you're cooking for as well. If you have somebody in your family who doesn't like it spicy, you can start off and keep it mild and then add yours at the end. Or in this case, we want to really just lightly infuse that piment d'Espelette flavor into the soup. Because think about this, we didn't just open up a can of chicken broth and pour this in. We're making the broth, and you can see already we have the onion and the bay leaf and the piment, the salt, but you're making a nice vegetable bouillon that the squash or pumpkin is being cooked in, and also infusing that bouillon with that sweet pumpkin taste. So what we want to do, we're doing two things. We're cooking the vegetables so they're soft enough to puree, but more importantly, we're making that bouillon. So what else would you put in to flavor that bouillon? Now, I wrote in the recipe, you can go many different ways with this. You can add, and go with that pumpkin pie spices. Thanksgiving, you could use apple and nutmeg and cinnamon and almost make this almost a sweet soup. Or you go in the opposite direction, something I'm doing, kind of cutting in between, but a very spicy, and I mentioned a peanut spicy African soup that I made while I was traveling in Africa as many moons ago. Somewhere in the sub-Sahara area at one of the first markets that we came across. And I remember it was my turn to cook for the group, and there was big pumpkins like we recognized, and all of my traveling companions happened to be British, Australian, or New Zealand. They were all Anglophones for the most part, and only a couple Americans, and people didn't know what to do with that pumpkin, and it was my turn to cook along with my partner. And so we bought a pumpkin. I said, I know, we'll make a pumpkin soup, and we had some onions. And then I saw these balls that a woman was sitting down selling off of a mat, and I didn't really know what they were. They were about like the size of a tennis ball, and I picked it up and and said, what is this? And she said, peanuts or ground nuts. And the ground nuts and peanuts had been pulverized and mixed with spices. I had no clue what spices, but they were very spicy, as it turned out, very hot, spicy, piquant. And I added that entire ball of peanut sauce into my pumpkin soup, and it was absolutely delicious. After that, I always have made pumpkin soup by using some peanut butter in with it and spices, so that's another direction that you can go to. Pumpkin becomes a nice base. It has its own flavor, but you can go many different ways with it. It's often used with sage, in Italian cooking, pumpkin and sage, or in curries, another great flavor. It just holds and accepts almost any kind of spices. So as this is cooking, I want to add those fibers back in. I'm going to let this cook now just until the pumpkin is very soft, and that skin is soft too, that I can mash it with a fork. Should take maybe 10 minutes. So this is a good time, while things are just still cooking, to dip in there and get a little taste and get a sense of what direction the soup is going to go into. So the first thing I'll do is just taste the broth a bit. I have these beautiful new tasting spoons from a friend here who makes them for me out of antique silver spoons. Okay, for me this is like perfect on the salt. I think some people might like to add a little salt extra on the end of this, but for me I'd rather keep it at this level. Remember, I salted the pumpkin rather than salted the soup. The onion is sort of mellow in there. It's not too strong. The bay leaf is just there. But the piment is so subtle right now that I think it's going to take a little bit longer for it to tint the color, or maybe I'll add just another piece, because I wouldn't mind this to be a little extra spicy. So that'll go in. And then you can either remove the piment or the peppers, the hot chilies, before you puree it, or you can leave them in and puree it into the whole thing. So you might, again, you want to adjust and taste as you go along. Now, the second thing we want to do is to see how far along we are with it. And the easiest way is just to take a piece in a spoon and go ahead and try to, well, if I poke it, it's quite soft. But can I smash it? Because that's, oh, there you go. And that is really nice. So that is as much as I want to go. I don't want it to be so liquidy that everything falls apart. I want that texture to be. So Let me just check a couple more pieces. If there's any bigger ones, they're all breaking up quite nicely. And that skin, that thin skin, also breaking up. So that's perfect. And what I'll do now is just turn off the heat. And then I can prepare the chestnuts and what I'm going to do with it. We'll come back after this sits for just a few minutes. It's always good to let things sit a little bit and relax into themselves. And I'll show you what we're going to do with the chestnuts now. Let's talk about chestnuts, because this is chestnut season and we begin to see them dropping from trees if you live in that area where they grow, or in the markets, or even available in the supermarkets. I haven't bought any yet that are fresh and need to be cooked, but I will do that in the next week or so. But I found these great chestnuts, which are already pre-cooked, and they're from the Dordogne, just north of here, so they're local. And what's really nice is that they come, first of all, they come in 2 pieces, so that I only need half of this, which is perfect, because if I opened up a big pack, I'd have to use them up or put them away. Sometimes we forget them. So I've got 1 pack here, which is great. And these are all ready to go. There's lots of recipes they even have on the inside of the box. Shows you exactly where they're made, their process, how to cook them. You can heat them up 30 seconds in a microwave, or 2 minutes on a saute pan. So it's easy enough to use them. They're already cooked, they're already peeled, which is always the arduous part. And I'm just gonna open up the vacuum pack here. And that should just open up. And these are nice size. They're not too big, which is great. I'm going to take some of the butter. And I want, again, to use the butter to emphasize that creamy part that I talked about earlier on. Put this up so it starts to melt, and open these up so that they go right into the pan at the same time. Now, I love chestnuts. I love chestnut puree, chestnut sweet for desserts, lots of pastries in France. It's always somewhat seasonal. It's this time of the year. And then the other thing that we really, really like to have are fresh chestnuts and new wine. So when the wine that just is being picked in the last month is now being made, when it's just almost finished its fermentation stage, sometime sort of mid-October, end of October, people will start to celebrate that new wine. It'll still be a little fizzy, it'll be a little cloudy, and you have a glass of new wine with some boiled chestnuts here that are boiled with a fig leaf, because that's what we do. And I'm just going to move these around. Now they're really beautiful and obviously have been kept from being broken up, so it's sort of a bit of a shame, but I want to use this in the soup. So I'm going to go ahead and take and break up a bit these nice round chestnuts so they become like croutons that I can sprinkle over the top of the soup. I do all kinds of things when I serve soup. Traditionally, in this part of France, you would use a piece of bread, a crouton, a large piece of bread, in the bottom of your bowl, or maybe even in the tureen as you serve this. That's how you would use. You don't serve wine with soup in the beginning. That's kind of a funny thing here. If you go to my local one, my little local cafes, they serve a big potage in the beginning to pass around, and everybody wants their wine, and they don't bring the wine until after you've had the soup. So these, we're just going to let these heat up a little bit, and not quite brown, but kind of sizzle them all. Again, I'm going to keep this slightly savory part of the soup on the higher point, but I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of salt and a little pepper on these. Again, these will be the garnish. Don't be afraid to taste things as you're going along. You might find like, oh, these are so delicious, you don't need to do anything else. You might want to add something, another element. That butter, salt and pepper, the chestnuts, just to make this into a delicious mix on its own. I could just eat that as a side with some other vegetables. Okay, so let's just get this soup back on to keep hot. And I'm going to go ahead and take out the bay leaves. Always count. I know I put 2 in there. Oh, there's the other one. And I'll get my immersion blender ready to go. Okay, so I have my immersion blender ready to go, and I'm just going to put this down in here. I always test it, make sure it's on before I put it in. And at this point, I just want to go over the big parts, the pieces, and break them up a little bit. And you can see how this is already starting to thicken. By tipping the pan a little bit and tipping the bottom, I'm not putting this right on the bottom, but at the edge, it's allowing more of the mixture to come in to the blades. So I can see this is a consistency that I like, that I'm looking for. It's smooth. It is thick enough that you can see it just sort of coats a spoon. We haven't had to add anything else to it to make it thick. We haven't added potatoes or flour or anything like that. And do you remember why? Because we added just enough water to start with. Now, years of experience have showed me how much water I need to add in the pan. But if you think about as much water, as much vegetable matter that you put in this case a squash, you want to add that much water, not much more. So it just covered that. If this is too thick and it became more of a puree, then I might add some more liquid at this time. And that's when you can add water. You're going to diminish the flavor a little bit. So you could add also a little wine. You could add some cream. It would make it a bit more creamier. But for me, this is about just right. And I'm going to go ahead and dish this up. We'll use this here. So get my dishing hand. And then I'm going to serve myself, because this is going to be my lunch. 2 nice ladles full. I'm going to take a spoonful of the chestnuts and garnish that on top. And then maybe, because I didn't think it was too hot, and I don't mind if it's a little spicier, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple slices of the piment d'Espelette as well. And if you really want to be more luxurious, you can add a drizzle of oil, maybe, and with chestnuts, we may want to stick with a walnut oil. I'm going to stick with a bit of butter because that was what we started with, and let that butter just sort of push that in there and let that melt to make a little puddle. So as I go to eat this, it's going to all mix together. So here is a beautiful soupe de potimarron et Chataigne, a pumpkin and chestnut soup, just perfect for October. I'm going to use my little chestnut spoon and get in here, get that first bite. It's savory. It's sweet without being sugary, which I think is one of the things that we have to get away from a little bit. I love pumpkin pie. I love all the sweet treatments of pumpkin. But when we look at pumpkin as a vegetable, let's take it to the other side. Don't drizzle maple syrup over everything. Happy October, everybody.